Okay, in section 3.4, I'd already made one video, but I wanted to emphasize that you must round to 3 decimal places as needed. And what that means is don't just round your final answer. If you look, and the way that I figured this out is, so a lot of times on your homework, it's not really about uh, knowing how to calculate it. Well, yes, you need to know how to calculate the answers, but a lot of times you have to make sure you're putting it in the format that the homework wants you to have it in, and you could be off 1 decimal place and it will mark it completely wrong. So that can be frustrating. But what I did is I looked at the mean, and they rounded to 3, which that's pretty straightforward because it tells you when you do the mean to round to 3 decimal places. But then as you find the standard deviation and you're going through the steps, notice that we know the mean, but then when you take the mean minus your x value, you round. So for every step, you need to make sure each answer is in 3 decimal places. And they continue to do this throughout, not just when they get to the final answer, but every answer needs to be rounded to 3 decimal places, which is your thousandths place. If you don't do this each step, your number is going to be off. So I wanted to do a video to show you exactly how to do this. So what I've already done is I've copied this. I basically copied to a clipboard actually, but you could open an Excel and do that first, but I'd already made me an Excel spreadsheet. I'd already set it up, so I just copied it to a clipboard and pasted it in. So I'm going to go to my Excel sheet, and what I do is I go ahead and label it the way that I want it set up. Now on your test, if you had to do this, you could label it on your paper the same way and just use a calculator. But since we have Excel for the homework, we are going to use Excel. So here's my table so I don't have to flip back and forth. My midpoint, well, if you add 5 plus 10, that's 15, and divide it by 2, you would get 7.5. And then 10 plus 15 is 25. Divided by 2 is 12.5. Okay, so what would that be? 17.5. And then this would be 45 divided by 2, which is 22.5. And 25 plus 30 is 55, so that is going to be 27.5. See the pattern? Just going up by 5 each time for your midpoint. So frequency, I'm going to be lazy. That's why I love Excel, because I can be lazy. I'm going to paste my frequency. So all I need to do here is make me a formula. Now if you're doing this in your calculator, you would take 7.5 and you would times it by 13 in your calculator, and you would put that answer right here. But since we have Excel, we can put our formula in. Equals this times this. Okay, and then instead of doing that every single time, you're going to drag it down and it's going to get your numbers for you. Give me just a second. Okay, so now that we have found that, we are going to find the mean. Okay, remember what you do is you add up your numbers and divide by the total. So we want the sum. If you were doing this by hand, you would add these up with your calculator. And of course, I messed that up. Let's see if I can go back. It's the only thing about the formula Just be careful when you're typing your formulas in. Okay, so we're going to do equals sum, parenthesis. Basically, I'm telling Excel to add these up, and then I want to divide by the total number of data values I have, and that's going to be all of these. So our mean is 17.88846. We do not want that. We do not want that long of a number. So if you will, this little button right here will decrease your decimal places until you get 3 numbers behind the decimal. So we're going to use the mean, this number right here. So that's my mean number. This is the number I want to work with, but let's make sure that that is the correct value. Okay, now we're going to move on to standard deviation. So the next step is to take your midpoint and subtract the mean. So we are going to do this number. Always make sure you put equals. Okay, your number minus your mean. So we're not going to use the number we had earlier. We're using the rounded number. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to drag those down. Just a second. Instead of putting minus C7, let's not do that. Let's just put in minus 17.885. And now drag it. Okay, so now this one, if you double click, you'll see it's this, minus 17.885. So each one of them will be subtracted. Now what we want to do, now if this was not rounded to the third decimal place, you would highlight it. Let me just show you can increase your decimal places and you can decrease, but we want it to be 3 numbers. Okay, now we're going to take our difference and square it. So we're going to do this. When you square something, you're timesing it by itself. So we're going to copy that down. So basically, I went from the midpoint, which is your x value, minus your mean, which is 17.885. So 12.5 minus 17.885. 17.5 minus 17.885, that's where these numbers came from. Then all I did was square these numbers. So if you're doing this in the calculator, you would type this number times itself or this number squared. Anytime you square a negative number, you get a positive number. Now, after you square the difference, you have to times it by the frequency. So you're going to take this value and times it by its frequency. Anytime you have several numbers that are in this range, you have to always multiply it by the frequency. We have to take the midpoint and times it by the frequency. Now we're taking the difference we got squared and timesing it by the frequency. Okay, now we're going to do the variance. So the way we do the variance is we take the sum of these numbers and close it. So you basically add all those numbers up and divide by n minus 1. What is n minus 1? Well, you have to add your frequencies up. 13 plus 7 is 20. 20 plus 28 is 48. 48 plus 21 is 69. And 69 plus 9 is 78. So 78, take 1 away, and we have 77. Let's see. So let's just make sure we got the sum from here to here divided by 77. That should be correct. Now to take the standard deviation, you're going to take the square root Make sure you always start out with equals. I'm bad about forgetting that. I still didn't type it right. Equals SQRT, parenthesis, and the standard deviation is the square root of the variance. So, first of all, I need to go back and fix this. We want the variance to be 3 numbers. Now we want to take the square root of h6, but we want to take the square root of the variance, but we want this number to be 3 decimal places. So the standard deviation is 6.125. Okay, and that is correct. I know it's frustrating when you have done all of these calculations and your number is a little bit off from what the homework wants you to do. I know that's time consuming and I know that's frustrating, but the good thing is you know what you're doing, you're following the steps, you're doing everything right, but they're wanting the decimal to be a certain amount. They're wanting you to round each time 3 places. And if you do it this way every time, you'll get it right on the homework. Just make sure that you understand the steps. Anytime you have frequency data, you use your values to find a midpoint. Then you take the midpoint and times it by the frequency. This gives you these numbers right here to help you. You have to do this to get the mean. So once you do midpoint times frequency, add these up and divide by the total number you have, which was the sum of these, which I believe was 78. So to get the mean, you divide by the actual total here. So you add this up and divide by 78, and that's how you get the mean. Most students have no trouble getting to this point, but somewhere in here they can get lost, so just be careful. Once you find the mean, you take each one of your values. So here your midpoint is x. That's what you use for x. So you take the midpoint for each row and you subtract the mean, and then you square them. Once you square them, you multiply it back by the frequency. So you're taking each one of these numbers and multiplying it by these numbers, and that's your squared values. Okay? Now, to get the variance, you take these squared values, kind of like you do the mean. You add them up and you divide by your total. But the difference is you're not going to divide by 78 when you get the variance. You divide by n minus 1, which is 78 minus 1. So you take the sum here, divide it by 77, and you get the variance. Remember, this is not what they were asking you to find. They're asking you to find the standard deviation. So you must take the square root of the variance to get the standard deviation. I really hope this video helps, and hopefully this will clear up a lot of frustration and problems that you've had with doing these calculations. Remember, if you have any questions, feel free to message me. There may be a question that the other students need to ask, but they haven't. So your feedback is very important, and I appreciate anyone that's asked for help. And hopefully this will clarify this section for you.